Morning, everybody. It's a chilly day here in Minnesota. We're down like 29, 30 degrees Celsius. Fahrenheit, which is about minus 2 degrees Celsius. It's a chilly day for nearly May. We're going to talk about Grant Green today and his legacy record. I think it's a fairly obvious choice, but it's definitely a landmark record and is worthy of inclusion in this series. First of all, I want to address two things. I am not anti-audiophile. I don't dislike people who are audiophiles. I merely feel there's such a strong voice representing the audiophile community in the online community that it doesn't leave a lot of room for alternate opinions, and I've seen way too many audiophile people speak down to new collectors, insulting some pressing they got. And I just think they're offensive and rude to beginners and discourage people. Like, okay, but you bought that press. Like, let them collect their own. And if there was no voice of dissent, I think it would be a very one-sided viewpoint of audiophile versus just listening to the music and not caring necessarily as much about the speakers and amplifiers and what pressing you happen to buy. And the degrees of variance between pressings is pretty minimal. And so this high and mighty opinion of, oh, I got this pressing, your pressing's garbage, it just comes off so condescending and so it makes my blood curdle. I'm like, all you're doing is turning that person off of jazz and possibly vinyl. You sound so haughty and so pretentious, and I see it so much too on the Facebook jazz groups. Some guy comes along and posts his new, affordable pressing of some Bill Evans or Chet Baker or whatever it is, and 27 comments like, oh my God, I can't believe you bought that pressing. Oh, it's like, talk to them about the music. Talk to them about how much you like so-and-so's playing on the drums. But they're incapable of it. They're incapable of just talking about the music. All they want to talk about is, my speaker system, which costs so much money, said the flaw on and there just needs to be a balance. And so I find myself trying to be that balance at times, trying to make people who feel like they've been insulted, don't worry about that. Don't take it too personal. They're looking for validation. Those audiophile people who are insulting and condescending, and don't take them too serious. Dismiss it. Buy the music you want to buy at the price point you want to buy it and enjoy it. And if you post it and a bunch of people insult it, fuck them. Seriously, fuck them. They're assholes. It's just, I think some of them just try to do it to sound knowledgeable, but they just sound like jerks. And it's gotten worse and worse over the last few years. And to the point where I have a hard time even going on the Facebook groups, the jazz groups. There's just so many pretentious posters and people trying to correct everybody and without any insight or talking about the music at all. You could have started off that conversation with, I love Chet singing on that record. That's not the best copy of that record, but I'm glad you're digging it. But it's never that. It's just this insulting talk about pressing. And so, again, it's not me complaining about audiophiles. It's not me hating those people or even having a problem with audiophile in any way. It's just me trying to be a counterbalance to all that negativity and condescension. If you want to buy wax time pressings and they're affordable and that's what you can get in your local record store and that's the only way you can access this music on vinyl, it's great. Isn't fucking Bill Evans great on that record? His piano playing on it, that should be, but it's just not in the vinyl community, especially in the jazz community. I think it's probably the worst in the jazz community, honestly. I think a lot of audiophile people want jazz because it's a great way to hear audiophile sound systems. I think rock and roll doesn't have that same separation between the instruments. You listen to Metallica or a lot of rock, everything's just kind of just in the same place at the same time going. There's not this, it's not the same dynamic or same audio as a jazz record, which gives you a lot of independent sounds to really kind of hear how your low end, your mids, and your highs sound. Anyway, that's all I want to say about that. I'm not condescending audiophiles. I'm just trying to make up for a lot of their condescension. And that's why I speak how I do about them often. The next thing I want to talk about is, before we get to Grant Green, is I think I've discovered something. And I think we have a very different relationship with music today than we did when I was a young man, when I was a child. And I think we've lost something. And what I mean is, when I was a young man, as an older teenager, into my 20s, into my 30s even, musical journeys were a very independent, isolated process where each person went out into the world, and you might have been steered some by a magazine here, you might have been steered by a documentary there, but there wasn't a ton of influencers steering everybody's path. And so everybody's collection and everybody's journey was independent. And that meant that when you discovered something or got into something, it was your inertia that took you there. It was your path. It was your knowledge. It was your digging. It was your connecting the spider web strands and going, oh, this is the next step in that ladder. And so it became something, a source of pride, a source of a marker of your journey. And each person's path was this interesting fingerprint of their life's path. And no two paths looked the same. And I think when you discover things on your own, your relationship with that music is more singular and insular, and it becomes more a part of your identity, and you're more willing to really vouch for it and stick with it, and it's much less temporal. Conversely, today, with the internet and YouTube, and I guess I'm an influencer myself, but I certainly don't think I have a narrow scope in what I'm trying to influence people on. I think it's, it covers a pretty wide swath of American history. And I try to broaden that scope even sometimes, and some people don't want me to go too broad. They want to keep it narrow. But there's so much great music that each person needs to find their own pathway, because your relationship with that music is different when you discover it independently on your own. And I feel like today, so many people are just watching these YouTube influencers, again, including myself, and they're buying what they're told to buy. There's not the same patience or independent searching. And it changes your relationship with that music. When you're always buying something that somebody else told you should buy, you don't have the same relationship with it. It's just different. And something that somebody else turned you on to, or that you felt obligated to have, it's just easier to let go of that connection and not value it the same way. And it doesn't take the same place in your life. And I think that's something we're really missing in today's music scene. That independent identity of my musical journey. And I would bet most people in this group over 30, especially over 40, can understand what I'm saying. That fingerprint of your musical life, your life's journey through music, each person's path, especially when you have to be my age, 44, 50, 60, you didn't have people steering you the same way. You might have had a record store clerk recommend something here and there, a friend, recommend something here and there, but you certainly didn't have access to online reviews and exposés and the pressure of a community saying this is a must-have and this new release is essential. Essential makes you feel like you need to have it. And buying something out of obligation can actually make you kind of resent it, especially if you don't love it. And so I guess what I'm trying to encourage here is feel free to be independent in your purchasing and your shopping and what you're looking for and what you like. I think it's the most important thing of all is never like something because you feel like you have to. And I made that mistake for a long time, even coming up when I did. There was still a great deal of pressure to feel like Bitches Brew was genius. It's one of the greatest records. Not for me. Never really once put that on and enjoyed it. Every time I've ever put it on, I'm like, well, this side's not over yet? Really? I'm only halfway through this side? Oh my God. And eventually you think that to yourself enough times, you can actually formulate your own opinion and go, you know what, this isn't for me. But in today's mindset, in today's information age, there's so much bombardment of what you expected to sound like and feel like and talk about and think is important. There's just not room for that independent journey. And I think it's sadly really affected all of our relationships with the music. And it used to be when you discovered a guy like Bill Evans on your own, that was special. That was a special thing. And it took you a long time to get there. And there's still some of that today. And I'm sure there's still some pretty independent collectors out there who do their own thing. But boy, there's still this incredible wave of consumption and uniform purchasing and speaking and regurgitating the same records, reissuing the same titles. So to the point where if you were to take the jazz vinyl community in its whole, there's going to be 70% of the people, half their collection, everybody's going to have those same records. And this is all, and I've bought plenty of reissues over the years. When I was coming up buying Coltrane in the 90s, I had bought plenty of old Impulse, but there was some I bought as reissues in the 90s. I've bought plenty of OJCs over the years. I'm not afraid or dislike reissues. A lot of them are important and the only way you can get really sought after titles. But if I go to someone's house and they have a record collection and it's all old pressings for the most part, rock, blues, jazz, soul, I want to dig through that collection. I want to see what old titles they found, what condition they're in. I love looking at the old fonts and prints and inks and how things were done and packaged and how well they survived, the smell. It's all part of the process, and I'll dig through your collection if it's predominantly old pressings. If I go to someone's house and they have a bunch of vinyl and it's all new pressings, my interest in it is greatly diminished. I go to a record store and see that same thing. And again, I have plenty of new pressings, so it's not about insulting that. It's just that I think that's where we've gotten. And there's just nothing wrong with having your own identity and finding what you like and buying stuff off the beaten path and not liking everything that everybody else likes. That used to be pretty common, where there was discourse and disagreement, and some people loved Mingus, some people didn't like Mingus. There's not really even room for debate nowadays. Everyone just feels like, oh, I have to like this. It's been reissued. Everybody who reviewed it said it was brilliant, so this must be great. And you're getting your opinions shaped for you. And by no means is this all my audience. A lot of you guys are older, my age, very independent thinkers and consumers and have your own opinions. But there's a whole wave of young consumers that are buying vinyl that are just stuck in this rut of what the influencers are saying is necessary to own and it's an essential piece. And I find half the time those influencers are bullshit. And I'll be straight honest with you. When you're asked to review something by a label or by an artist and they give you that piece of music, it's really hard to be critical. It's really hard to dislike it. And I've had enough things given to me where someone said, will you review this on your channel? And I try to be honest. But still, when it's a gift, you feel a certain degree of, I don't want to insult the guy. I don't want to be derogatory to this. You know what I mean? They gifted this to me. And so you try to find what you do like about it and be honest. And you can always almost find something you like about something. But for people who make a consistent living off reviewing new labels, you know what I mean? They're friends with the people at these labels. It's really hard for a guy like that to be critical or honest of new releases. And so there's this chorus of praise that just wafts across the entire industry of, oh, this is a great, really, I can't believe they found it. This is amazing. Let's praise everything that they're doing. And there's no room for a critical opinion. And I've tried to keep my track record fairly honest, and I've actually discouraged, in some senses, having to do reviews for things that have been gifted to me. Because I'm like, it's hard to be honest. It's hard to be honest. And if you're a good friend with so-and-so, are you going to put on your channel comments disparaging that release when you know they're going to watch it and see it and go, I'm not giving that guy a record again to review? And so the review, and this probably goes back even somewhat to the 50s and 60s, the great reviewers of those days. And you'll find that their initial reviews and opinions have been echoed generation after generation. And what's on All Music today is often from the back of something Leonard Feather wrote 50, 60 years ago. Ira Gitler wrote 60 years ago. That stuff just kind of transcends its way through time. And so there's a real echo chamber. And there's even less room today as a collector to be an independent consumer and to have your own opinions. And by all means, feel free to have your own opinions. Like what you like. Don't have to like what you don't like. Buy the pressings you can afford that are available to you, that fit within your budget. Dismiss anybody who wants to criticize those opinions. Your agenda might not be the same as that guy. He wants to sit there and go, oh, I'm in my audiophile silent room, and we've got all the dust particles out of the room. Put your suit on. It's a vacuum in here. So let's listen to music in silence. Do you hear that? No, you didn't. That's because my speakers are so great. And that's kind of the mentality a lot of these people live in. And when some of these collectors are actually just like, I like to put a jazz record on when I'm doing homework, so a $12 pressing on something is perfect for me, because I can't really sit there and just put my ear horn and listen to it that finite kind of way. I could stream something, but I decided to buy vinyl to take a chance on being a vinyl collector, and I've been insulted by every vinyl collector in the community. And so that singular journey, I think it's an important thing, young collectors, to get out there and find your own path, like what you like. Feel free to disagree with the mainstream, because trust me, the mainstream is wrong way more than they'll ever admit to. They review things positively out of pressure and out of trying to protect their own jobs and making money. And when money becomes part of the factor, honesty goes out the window. So I'll leave it at that. But that's just some thoughts I had. That's something I realized just the other day. I'm like, man, people's journeys today is much different than mine. I didn't have 1,000 voices saying, you got to buy this, you got to have that, you need to have this. It was always my own process. And in some ways, it's a slower process. You slowly take these little baby steps this direction, that direction to get where you end up. But it's also your process. And it becomes your journey, and it becomes a more valued part of your life's experience, because it reminds you of the steps and the journeys and the experiences that you had, and those records can connect with those moments versus just being, well, so-and-so on this channel said I needed to have it, and it's great. And we've all been there. We've all been there. Anybody who was curious what was playing in the background, it was Teddy Wilson with Specs Powell, I think Milt Hinton. It's at the Newport Festival. I think this was 58, 57 maybe. Cool old Verve pressing. Found that in Milwaukee or Chicago, I can't remember, last month. Great stuff. And the Jerry Mulligan on side 2 is really fantastic, actually. The Mulligan with Bob Brookmeyer. That was a really great group. I kind of forgot how great that group was and how it's kind of distilled Ellington, you know. And it's weird how a lot of jazz, you can kind of distill it from one or two camps. Almost everything in jazz has either Ellington at its roots for being compositional and with edges of dissonance and being very much an expressive tone versus bassy, which is much more rhythm the blues and swing and just feeling. And so almost all jazz has one of those two camps at its base point. So talking now Grant Green, we're talking Idle Moments, 4154, which is one of those few records on Blue Note I actually have the number memorized. It's a record I've referenced so many times. I've played it at so many DJ gigs over the years. Idle Moments to me is one of the most beautiful tracks I think I've ever heard. I think the first time I heard it was probably in Ken Burns' jazz documentary, which I think is an incredible piece. And it gets ripped a lot again by that same community because it didn't spend enough time talking about Mingus and Mobley and the last 10, 15 years of the jazz canon. But it spent a lot of time developing all the foundations of the music and telling the stories of the true architects. And it also tells you the background of the American history that surrounds it. It's an invaluable piece. And I get tired of the criticism of that piece. And it's by no means a perfect piece. But again, it was already, 17 hours long to have gone in that same depth with all the Blue Note artists and Riverside artists and all the artists of the 60s. And it would have gone on for weeks. And so I wish they'd have covered that stuff more. But again, when I watched it, that was where my knowledge piece was. And as I've gotten deeper into my collection, I really value them talking about Lester Young and Billie Holiday and Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong, Count Basie, Charlie Parker. All those architects are important pieces to understand, and they're the shoulders that all those other kids are standing on. But I heard this in there. They used it a few times as kind of a background collage piece music. And Idle Moments to me is one of the most beautiful songs on the planet. And it's a song I've talked about numerous times. It ended up being twice as long as it was supposed to be because the first soloist went twice as long on his break. And then all the other players followed in that same ilk. So they're all playing, I think, 32 bars instead of 16. Or maybe it was 64 instead of 32. I can't remember exactly. But it ends up being a 13-minute piece or so. It's a long track. And the great Alfred Lyon didn't stop it. He's like, this is great. You know, I mean, part of him wanted to cut the track. He's like, no, but it was so beautiful. They let it cut and let it go, and they ended up using it. And so it fills up half of side one. And the sidemen are just as important on this record as Grant, to be honest, starting with Duke Pearson, who his piano playing on this is just an absolute revelation. It's Hank Jones-like with its delicacy, its melodic, harmonic structuring. He just has some real beautiful parts in this. And then, of course, Bobby Hutcherson and Joe Henderson bring kind of a youthful vitality to their solos and an edge, slight edge, that really emphasizes the blues can sound slightly different from each generation, but it's still a language we all speak. So Henderson, Hutcherson, Pearson, and Grant Green all take these long solo breaks. Each of them has like probably 90 seconds or so, maybe 2 minutes to state their themes. And it's just absolutely wonderful. The vibraphone sounds just gorgeous. Henderson's in a wonderful headspace. Grant Green's gorgeous. And of course, Duke Pearson is absolutely killing it. And we can't leave out Bob Cranshaw and Al Harewood on the bass and on the drums. Again, you have to be careful with some of these episodes. But it starts with this beautiful, delicate piano. And Pearson to me is such an essential thing. The bass and the drum are just delicate. There's a little vibraphone. Watch the piano here. That's what I'm saying. Hank Jones like. Delicate. A curtain of softness. Yeah. And that's what I'm talking about. It's a slow blues. It's got a nice warm gut to it. So it just gestates there and sits there with a warm amber glow. And there's a kind of communion between the six men, especially the four soloists, that's just delightful. They state the theme again. this light samba-like rhythm to it where it just kind of rolls. And I play it at clubs sometimes, like I said, for lounge sets, brunch sets. And Pearson really steals the show here. And Pearson's kind of really coming into his own at this point at Blue Note. He had those two early records, Profile and Tender Moments, Tender Feelings, is it, in the 60-61 era. And then he kind of becomes more of an A&R guy and doesn't record much for a couple years because he's kind of running the business side of things after Ike Quebec passed away. But then he comes back to recording here, probably 63 with this record. And Grant Green's not your typical guitar player, 63, November 4th. He's not Wes Montgomery. He's not playing chords. He's not going to give you the harmony of a chord structure, hardly ever. He's not going to play rhythm, hardly ever. He might do a soft strum at times, to color softly in the background. But he's predominantly a bebop stylist. He plays long single note lines like a horn player. And so when you listen to Grant Green, you gotta almost not think of it as a guitar player, but just as a soloist. And there's a little chording right there. But it's definitely a guy that's approaching guitar from a bebop sensibility. It's about him holding notes and playing these lines that Parker would recognize. And that's part of the beauty of Grant Green. He's not Wes Montgomery. He's not Green. What's his name? The great Freddie Green. He's not a rhythm player. He's not Mick Jagger. He's not going to sit there back there and playing rhythms through the whole song, writing riffs. He's not a riff writer in that sense. He's a guy that wants to play bebop or hard bop, as it were, because there's a real tangible crossover between the two. They're linked inextricably. And when Grant Green gets into playing the blues through that bebop sensibility, he's a wonderful note selector. He selects these wonderful notes that have the gospel of the blues drenched through them. He's very much spatially aware. And so he's not adverse to leaving open spaces to let a note ring out. He's not going to sit there pushing out 1,000 notes just to be a virtuoso. Each note, each line has construct. It's connected like a singer would sing and choose his notes. And he's telling a story. Thus, he's a soloist in the bebop sense. He's kind of singular in his approach, but there's not a lot of guitar players who are quite that dimensional in how they do it. Most guys like a Sal Salvador play guitar in a lot of different ways. A guy like Chuck Wayne plays guitar in a lot of different ways. Wes Montgomery approaches the guitar in a lot of different ways. Grant Green's pretty much approaching it, especially in this era, as a guy playing bebop notes. Single notes that tell a story, that are spoken in a cadence like a lyricist. Again, that's the essence of what Parker and even Armstrong developed. So that makes him a special player. And there's a lot of people who kind of are condescending of Grant Green, which I don't understand because I find every one of his records very enjoyable, especially his early Blue Note work. And he's probably got 4 records before this, maybe 5. Feeling the Spirit, Grant's First Stand, Green Grant, or Grant Green. Green is, I can't remember, something Green. Those early Blue Notes are fantastic. And he's kind of really playing in a simpler form. And this record's kind of a bit of a more complex piece. In part because it's a sextet. A lot of Grant Green's early work will be guitar, organ, drums. Well, the organ with the foot pedals will be playing the bass as well. Or it'll be piano, bass, drums, guitar, quartet. See what I'm saying? Very kind of simple, where the guitar is given most of the space, and they're kind of shorter songs because of that, because you don't have four soloists. The constructs and the arrangements of this record, which I think Duke Pearson does a lot of the arranging on this, because that's part of what he did really well, was he was a great arranger. He really knew how to put musicians in strong settings. That was part of his A&R sensibility. So he knew how to draft the right people for each record. And so if you have Duke Pearson on a session, be prepared to be delighted. There's not going to be a lot of mistakes or the wrong person for the job. He really gets that part of it really well. And so when he selects this sextet for this record with those four soloists plus the piano, the bass, and the drums, what you end up with is a Grant Green record that's quite different from most of his body of work. He doesn't have horns on a lot of his records. He's ultimately a soul jazz guy, which people kind of don't recognize that he is, but he is. When you have guitar and organ, bass and drums, that's soul jazz. And it's a very black movement in jazz in the 60s that was kind of a resistance against the avant-garde. It was a resistance against the free jazz. The black community was saying, you know what, we want to keep to our roots and make music that our community will enjoy having a picnic to still. Oh, here goes Joe Henderson. That's how long Grant's solo was. And here's the second solo with Henderson. And Henderson's just breathy. He's channeling Ben Webster, Illinois Jacquette here. He's just got this wonderful tone. It's dreamy. It's luxurious. And Henderson has that capability to be on the edges of the music, or to be painting the center line. And here he's painting the center line with, again, the essence of the blues and the gospel of the blues and the black church. And you'll get the same thing from the next two soloists, who we're just going to jump ahead a little bit here. Here's Bobby Hutcherson. Fantastic stuff. The blues. Feeling. It's not about 1,000 notes a minute. It's not about making the most abstract sounds you can. It's about just telling someone how you feel. That's what jazz is at its heart and its soul and its core, is the expression of my human condition. And intellect gets in the way of that. Composition can get in the way of that. So when you have really well arranged blues, you get some complexity, some modernity, but you still have the essence of the black church and the blues oozing through the fabric of it. And this is a great example of a very modern sounding piece. Still sounds very contemporary, like it could have been recorded yesterday. All the tones, all the delivery of the sounds, it's all very present and very current. But it's got the roots in the deepest parts of this tree trunk, in the black church and in the blues. It's just so anchored in that. It's one of, listen to Hutcherson. It's really something you should dig in yourself if you don't know it. It's as elegant and as spiritual and as beautiful and as melancholic and as dreamy and as luxurious and as, it just puts you in the most cool headspace. And whether I'm on the 90th floor of an apartment overlooking New York City in front of a grand piano, this elegance could ring out. If I'm in the basement of a black church in Harlem, these blues make sense. It's a very omnipresent piece. It works in a lot of settings because it's accessible, it's melodic, it's harmonic, it's beautiful, it's got a great ensemble, it's got good arranging, and it's got the blues underneath all of it. And Alfred, when they were done tracking, it was just like, this is an incredible thing. And I'm going to do a disservice here because I'm not going to talk much about the rest of the record because this track is just so fantastic. But let's still mention quickly, Django's a fantastic track on side 2. Nomad's great on side 2. Duke Pearson composed that along with Out of Moments. Jean DeFleur is kind of an tempo number that follows this, more of a hard bop number. And John Lewis wrote Django on side 2. I'm going to give you a little quick tidbit of that. And of course, Django is a reference to Django Reinhardt, the great Belgian gypsy-style guitar player who had the Hot Club in France with Stéphane Grappelli. That was the name of their group, the Hot Club of Paris or France. And they did that kind of Seine cafe jazz in the 40s and 50s that was just light and buoyant and stimulated your appetite for a croissant. Django was a legend, one of the true great improvisers on the guitar, innovators, helped push guitar onto a lot of people's templates. You know, Charlie Kirshner was one of the true architects of the early jazz sound on guitar, but Django's right there in terms of his influence and how big a shape he is over jazz guitar. Very few jazz guitarists won't accredit Django to some degree for who they are and what they play. He was, again, probably next to Wes Montgomery, is one of the most brilliant players, Django. And so this is an homage to him written by the great John Lewis of the Modern Jazz Quartet fame. And I got one thought on Modern Jazz Quartet right now, too. I was doing my trading card for Gil Evans the other day. And it's just funny to me because Gil Evans was a big architect in the third stream, in the stitching together of the European compositional fabric with the sounds of jazz and blues. And Gil Evans did that really well. And there's a hypocrisy in jazz today that I can't stomach. And again, it's part of that echo chamber that exists in jazz today, where a lot of the critics today and the modern writers and the YouTubers hate MJQ, but they love Sketches of Spain. They'll talk about Porgy and Bess, Miles and Gil Evans, those crossover records, and say how brilliant they are. But Modern Jazz Quartet, that's beneath me. It's the same thing. It's third stream. It's what it is. John Lewis is a brilliant player, brilliant composer. So again, I just have beef sometimes with the modern community today because it's so echo chambery. It's so just repeating and regurgitating the same stuff over and over and over again. People can think for themselves. And maybe I'm guilty of that same thing here on this channel, but I certainly try not to be. I certainly try not to be just another voice echoing the same sentiments. I truly try to make most of my opinions integral and from my point of view and from my heart. I think that's important for me. I think it's why I connect with the listeners I do, is I keep it honest. And I'm not afraid to say this new release isn't that essential, or this record to me is not a fun listen, regardless of what it is or where it is. Here they pick it up a little bit. And no, by no means is Grant Green really in the same camp as Django. They're very different players. But it's still a wonderful rendition of this track. And the whole record's very enjoyable. However, Idle Moments is a tier above. That track is just, to me, one of the greatest songs on the planet. And for me, it's also a showcase of a great starting place for jazz. If a friend of you says, where should I start with jazz? You'd have a hard time finding a better place to show someone than Idle Moments by Grant Green. It's got great dreamy saxophone. It's got some lovely vibraphone. It's got a good blues undercurrent from the rhythm section. The piano is elegant and sophisticated, and the guitar is playing like a horn, teaching us about that vocal styling of all instrumentalists. Once Armstrong and Parker and those architects said, you know what, every one of these instruments wants to be their own voice. None of us just want to be part of the ensemble in the background, playing, not really getting to speak our piece. It's when you get to speak those individual notes, and each one of them becomes a word, a syllable, a vocabulary, that I can start to have some insight into who you are, how you feel, and what you're talking about. That's why they all wanted to do it. That's why everybody said, oh, I need to be a bebopper. I need to be a soloist. I want to express what I have to say. And in the earlier versions of this music, a lot of instruments were relegated to being kind of background, holding the piece together while the instrumentalist soloists that we have out front get to say their things. And it was slowly, over the course of time, where almost every instrument in the orchestra, through one innovator or another, learns to find their own voice. And that was a really cool thing. Gene Krupa changed how drummers soloed and played. I go along with guys like Louis Bellson. You know, there's innovators, Buddy Rich. They made drums a solo lead instrument at times. A guy like Jimmy Blanton comes along the bass and says, you know what? Oscar Pettiford, who's the next generation, we're going to make bass an instrument that we can play lead melody on and be innovative and interesting while the rest of the band holds it together for me to play. And Jimmy Smith comes to the organ and says, you know what? I'm not just going to play chords with the organ and lay in the background and just be there for you to solo over and I'm your mattress. I don't want to just be a mattress. I want to be on top of the mattress having fun like the rest of y'all. So Jimmy Smith shook it down. Parker on the alto, Coleman Hawkins on the tenor. So many guys that came along and said, you know what? This instrument has the capability of being way more than this. Let me see what I can do. Elmer Snowden took the banjo and said, I can do this. It's a universal thing. And it comes throughout jazz through all the different generations. Charlie Christian was the guy in guitar predominantly who did it. There was guys before. Christian, of course, dabbled in it. But Christian was the guy who really said, I'm going to bebop my way through an entire song. I'm not just going to take a little 4-bar, 8-bar break and do that. Christian said, I need to play. And Benny Goodman saw that. And that's part of the wonder of jazz. It's the part of the wonder of the individuality of jazz. It's that ability to express my soul's condition. That's the worth of it. That's the value of it. So it's not in the shock factor of incredible composition. Composition is a nice thing to add, but it can actually be a hindrance to expression. Expression of my soul's condition, that's why jazz interests me. It's this honest expression of a human saying, there's nothing filtering or censoring what I feel into this horn. Words fall short in expressing how I feel all the time. Rock and roll is repetitive and the words box songs into meanings. Jazz is revelatory to me because it's this honest expression of each individual at that moment in time, how they felt. And there's no bullshit. And I can't stand bullshit. I can't stand lying. I can't stand the media, the social media. I can't stand it. I want honesty. That's why a guy like Bob Marley is transcendent to me. His words are so full of life. Consistently, throughout my life, he elevates my spirituality, my consciousness. The things Marley says are edifying. They build me up. John Lennon and Bob Dylan had that same ability to say things that every time I heard on Masters of War, I'm like, woo, come ye Masters of War. I'm going to follow your coffin until I'm sure that you're dead. Okay, Bobby Dylan, I feel that. Okay, I feel that. And it was when I got that same context out of jazz that it's expressing some guy's emotion without any consideration of filter or censor or worry about what someone's going to think or feel because it's being done in a code. That's when the magic took over and my hair stood on end and it electrified the entire experience of listening to jazz. And until you've got that revelation, jazz doesn't make the same kind of sense. The first 10 years, 12 years I listened to jazz, it was notes and sophisticated and it was so revelatory about how sophisticated I am. I'm an intellect. I listen to... I missed everything. And when that moment clicks and I got what it was kind of really doing and what it was about and how I could suddenly feel, again, the locomotion story I've told many times with Coltrane and Lee Morgan, how I do when Lee Morgan comes in on that song, I'm just like, woo, he's pissed off today. Someone must have stepped on his toes, sprayed him with water at the bus stop, rained and he forgot his umbrella. He's not in a good mood. It was that epiphany that was like, whoo, all of jazz came to life at that moment. And you can get lost in jazz real easy without that sign marker. But when you follow that sign marker, it will all come together and make a new kind of sense that's powerful and magical. So I don't hate audiophiles. A lot of them are dear friends. I just think there needs to be a balance in the vinyl community, on the YouTube community, saying that, you know what, if you don't want to be an audiophile, you don't got to be. If you want to buy $10 records and do your homework while you're listening to them, just to get to know jazz, and that's what you can afford, that's awesome. I'll happily talk with you about Teddy Wilson. Let's chat. Let's talk about the great playing on that record by Coleman Hawkins. Or Charlie Mingus, for that matter. And Eric Dolphy. Let's talk about the music, not all that other stupid shit that just gets overbearing. Number 2, follow your own musical journey. It's great there's influencers out there and channels that you can get ideas from, but don't be afraid to have a singular entity and experience with the music you want to buy, purchase, and love, and make your own decisions on what you do like. I think that's the most important thing. I think a lot of people out there feel an obligation to love certain records, and they post them, and they feel like they're part of the community now because I got the $80 audiophile pressing of this record that's so important. And I think a lot of them are faking it. And I can say that because that was once me. I once faked it in a day where the voice of pushing opinion was much quieter. Back in the day, I had liner notes, a few jazz books, a magazine here and there. You know what I mean? Once in a while I saw a documentary on jazz on PBS or something. But I didn't have all these voices telling me how to think and feel and what was good and what wasn't. And now, if you only just watch YouTube to be steered, it ends up with half the community having the same records. And no one having their own relationship with that identity or that journey. And so the music means less to them. And it slowly becomes more disposable. And when they decide to move on, it's not part of their life journey that they're setting aside. It's part of some influencer's life journey that they're dismissing at that point. And that's the problem. When it's your journey and your choices and things that you came to in your own experience, the relationship with it becomes special and ingrained. When you're just reflecting other people's opinions, eventually you'll be like, I don't really care about that music. It was a mistake. And I'm just going to get rid of all this stuff. Because it was never your own journey. So let the music be your own journey. Don't be afraid to say, I didn't like that. Don't be afraid to say, I love something that no one else likes. But don't just be an echo chamber. Because we have enough of that dishonesty going on today. Appreciate you all. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. We try to talk honestly about the music and the importance of the music and the history behind the music on this channel. And I appreciate every one of you, all my Patreon subscribers. Thank you dearly. I appreciate you all very much. We're still working on the trading cards. I hope I can have them done sometime this year. I'm approaching 400 of them done. And there's almost 700 in the set. I'm having my wife help me with a few things, which is helping move it along. I got really burned out for a little while on it, but we're making progress again right now. So I'm looking forward to having that accessibility and sharing that with you Patreon supporters. There's a merchandise store below with great t-shirts and hoodies and coffee cups. If you want to purchase that, it helps support the channel as well. Y'all be safe. You have a great day. We'll talk to y'all soon. Peace.